Okay, everybody, welcome back. Today I am joined by Blair Melodic, who is the CEO and co founder of Clio Social. Her and I have met a while back now. It's been several years, actually. And she knows what she's talking about when it comes to social media and all of that. So, we're going to chat today about building a social media strategy. And the way that we've kind of broke it down is through 6 questions of which you should be asking yourself when building a social strategy. So, Blair, welcome. Before we jump in, let's talk to everybody about like the importance of having a strategy and why we should even be putting a strategy together in the first place.
Amazing. So nice to be here and to see you in this platform. So it's really important to have a strategy. I would say, it's one of those things you hear a lot. It's so important to have a strategy. But what I always like to talk about is also going to make your life so much easier. So
Yeah.
if you're thinking about, oh, what do I do on social media? I hear that a lot. Like I have this blank feed. It's so much to do. What do I do with it? It'll actually make you feel so much better to have a strategy because it'll outline what's your tone of voice? What does your feed look like? What do you even talk about on there? Are your content pillars? Who do you want to appear as on social media? And part of that's also people often think that their brand guidelines are their social media strategy, and they're not, because the way you appear on social media is a little bit different. Often it's a bit more conversational. It's a bit more, how you would talk to a friend versus how you'd want to appear on your website. So it just really helps to have that all laid out. And besides the fact that it'll be better for your audience, I actually feel like a lot of the time it ends up being a lot less stressful for you.
Yeah, for sure. And because I think what happens is, or this is why actually this is why I feel someone needs a strategy. When you have, these ideas, you're not really sure what to do with them, or on the contrary, you don't really have ideas and you're not sure what to post. So it's like instead of twiddling your thumbs and wondering, okay, what should I be posting? How often should I be posting? What's the type of content that I should be posting? Like all of those things can be outlined, and that's why we're going to get into the questions of like the things that we should be asking ourselves when building these strategies. So if you're a small business owner or if you're starting your own company and want to get on socials, having that strategy is super important. It's really the foundation to support you in every decision that you make regarding your social media channel moving forward. So, the first question that you should be asking yourself if you're building a strategy is who is your target audience, right? So, let's talk a little bit about how we can define that, Blair.
For sure. So I think a lot of people hear about surveys and hiring researchers to figure out their audience. Let's just assume for now that we don't have that access to that, because that's obviously one way that you could figure out your audience is asking a bunch of people a bunch of questions and figuring out what they like and what they dislike and what kind of products they're looking for or services. But for this conversation, let's say you just have to start posting. You don't have access to that. So how do you even start to think who are you talking to? And often you have to start with your product or your service. So just as an example, let's say you have, an eco-conscious fashion brand that's everything is made very ethically in your city. And it has a certain price point because of that. So you can start to break that down and say, okay, so I know that it's kind of a where to work style. So people will have to have maybe urban jobs. Maybe the price point that it's at means that they have to have a certain level of their salary. Maybe the clothing are mainly for women. And starting to break all that down just starts to make you think, okay, who is my audience and how do I speak to someone like that? And inevitably, you might get it a little bit wrong. And that's okay because your
Mhm.
content will tell you that. You start to click through like who's seeing my content, who's engaging, actually click on their profiles, like start to like look into who are these people and then go back and like rebuild your profile from that. You might find that people you never expected are really engaging with your content, and that's your audience. So start to look at their Facebook profiles, their TikToks, whatever. Like, who are they following? What products are they talking about with their friends? Like, what are they sharing? What are they liking? And then you'll start to really break down who is your audience, not even what like age they are and what gender they are, like all that kind of basic stuff, but like, what do they like to do on the weekend? What are they buying? Like, what kind of personalities do they have? And then that'll make it so much easier to create content for them.
Yeah, I feel like people might also be surprised by what they find too. And sometimes it's almost to a point where you have to rethink who your target audience is because you might have thought it was one, group of people, and then your social channels are telling you something else. So you have the option to either adjust who you're speaking to and making sure that your content reaches those people, or change your target audience and then make sure that all of your messaging is communicating to them. So, I mean, in my eyes, if it's already working with a certain group of people online, that's the way that we should be going, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you choose your audience. If you're doing your job right with marketing, it's going to get to that audience, whether that's through actual advertising where you actually plug in who you're looking for and then it literally gets put in front of them, or if you're creating content, it's organically getting to them. If you're creating content that you know that audience will like, it'll probably get to them, right? Like that's the whole goal. And I think what's really interesting is that once that's already working, you might have other segments and other people that they're telling about your product and your service, and you're seeing, oh, wait, now I have not just one or two audience profiles, I have four and I have five.
Yeah.
And then you start going back and changing your strategy, which by the way is okay. Your strategy doesn't have to like live in
Evolving.
stone.
Yeah. Ever evolving
Exactly.
for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I get that, like, don't be stuck on one audience. I think a lot of people kind of start with this, like, this is my one target audience. But like you said, there can be segments. And by defining them and being as specific as possible, that's how you get to reach those people, right? And this is a lesson that I've learned. I think anyone in business, anyone in sales, like, specificity is kind of the key to really reaching and communicating to those people. Because what do they say? If you're selling to everybody, you're not selling to anybody. It's not going to resonate, right? The more hyper specific you are, the better it is. It doesn't mean that just because you defined, an audience that's like hyper specific, that that's the only person that you can sell to. It's just a strategy in order to be able to reach them so that they can convert in your sales funnel, right?
Exactly. If you reach someone who buys your product who you didn't expect to, you're not going to be like, oh no, they shouldn't have this.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, and kind of looking into what those stats are saying, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So moving on. Number two question to ask yourself when building a social strategy is, what are your goals? So success comes from building engaged communities more than large follower counts. Let's talk a little bit about how people can go about setting goals on social media specifically. So that can look like, brand awareness, lead generation, community management. How does someone go about setting those goals?
I would say to look at your business goals first. So social media is obviously one tool that
Hmm.
works in marketing to get your business goals. But if you're selling a product, that's actually your end goal for social media. But maybe social media is somewhere along that funnel, right? So if you know that ultimately you need to buy a product, for example, or sell a service, then where does social media fit in that funnel? So you want people to probably click somewhere. You want to click somewhere to them to see more information, buy your product. So what could your metric be for a product? Click throughs, right? Those are probably going to be what you're looking for. If you're selling more of a service and you want awareness of your brand, you might care more about engagement and even the type of engagement, right? So you see this engagement rate on whatever metric platform you might be using, like Later or Sprout or whatever. And it's like, okay, that's a number. Cool.
That's a
But then,
number.
but then what does it really mean, right? And
Yeah.
I think what is really nice to look at is who's saving your posts. Like that shows you,
Mm.
are they valuable? And if people think that what you're posting is valuable, they probably will remember you. Are they sharing it? They're like, oh, I want to send someone else what you're talking about. That's also like a high value type of engagement versus just like that one number and that big number on your metrics. And I think that's really what tells you if what you're doing is working. And also it could tell you so much more about what you're doing with your brand. So say you're getting a lot of click throughs, but no one's buying the product. So you start to think, okay, something's broken here, but like, where is it? Clearly
Yeah.
it's not my post because they're clicking, but once they're clicking, something is breaking there. Then you can start looking at like, which pages are they viewing on your website? Like, where are they stopping? Maybe you need a new landing page, like whatever, but it could teach
Hmm.
you so much if you look at those details versus just these like numbers that appear on a board sort of thing.
Yeah, for sure. Looking at the funnel as a whole and like how that communication flows as well, I think is important because, like you said, you might be communicating such a strong message on your social, then when they click through and get on your landing page, something isn't resonating, right? So is it the language? Is it that there's a disconnect between the two? Is it suddenly that you're sharing a new piece of information that wasn't available before that's turning them away? So you got to kind of like play detective a little bit, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's we're talking so I feel like generally and because it's like there's so many different possibilities, right? So many different brands and different ways that you can basically communicate and go about making mistakes. So it's really about like playing that investigator and looking deeper to see where is that break happening so that you can be clear in adjusting things from the beginning so that it flows through the whole thing. And yeah, basically going back to defining your goals. Okay, moving on. Number three question. you should be asking yourself, which platforms are right for you? So that's pretty straightforward. I think let's break it down actually for people because I feel like they can put themselves in a few different categories. Let's say for an audience that is more on like a B2B side versus an audience that's more like a lifestyle brand.
Yeah, we could definitely start with B2B. It's always fun to talk about this because people always think that like B2B is just LinkedIn, and it is to some extent. Like, obviously, if you're talking to businesses, where are they? They're on LinkedIn.
Right.
That's a great place to start. But I also like to say that like whoever is on LinkedIn is also probably on TikTok and Instagram, like in their personal time. And then the people that are doing, selling to consumers, like those consumers probably also have jobs and are on LinkedIn. So like a lot is a little bit more like meshed together. And I think people often
Hmm.
think of it. So LinkedIn is definitely the main one to be on if you're business to business. But think about your personal LinkedIn too. So like LinkedIn pages are great as like a website. So you go on your personal LinkedIn and you're talking about things that are really specific to you, your experience with the product, and people just connect with that more. So it's really important to be posting on your personal LinkedIn and not just your business page. And
Mm,
also the algorithm just likes that so much better. The algorithm really wants us to be communicating on like a person to person level. And so they're actually pushing a lot of the personal content out into like the news feed way more than they are the pages. And there's
yeah.
all these like, theories about posting links in your post versus posting them in your comments, and like try all that stuff for sure. But really what LinkedIn seems to be supporting from all the different accounts we run is personal accounts. Like personal accounts talking about personal things, getting those kind of personal comments and conversations going. So if you're a founder, post on your own LinkedIn. Like don't just post on your pages. I think that's really important. And then talk about your business on TikTok. Like if you're on TikTok and your audience is on TikTok, or the even if you're a business to business brand, that business is on TikTok and they're probably on there too. Like why not talk about your business on there too? It doesn't have to be so one dimensional when you think of selling to businesses.
Yeah, I actually want to kind of speak about this one specific company. You might not know about them. They're a Montreal based chocolate brand. And I've spoken about them before on the podcast because like I'm obsessed with their journey. I think like they're amazing in what they're doing. The brand name is Midday Squares, and the approach that they took is, they're creating a huge company. And yes, their product is selling to consumers, but they're showing the behind the scenes of their entire business and process, and they're doing that on LinkedIn. So even though they're sharing on their like business page, the way that they're sharing is very personal because it's the behind the scenes of what's going on. They talk about like how they go into their coaching sessions and therapy sessions for entrepreneurs and all of the problems, the fact that they were sued, like the issues they had with their labels. Like they're super, super transparent and there's such a human element to their brand. So I feel like, too, like, there's that wall that certain businesses have up where they're like, hey, I feel like I'm a little bit too corporate and I'm scared to kind of show and tear my walls down. But this brand does such a good job at doing that and bringing that personal element in the business, which I feel like is interesting because you're saying it's the personal stuff that's performing the best. And they're basically their personal stuff on their business page is what's performing best. So I feel like it's almost that over the personal page versus business page. What do you think?
Yeah, and do you know the brand actually? So I know what you're talking about.
Okay.
And I think what's so interesting is that when people know a brand and what's happened with them and their journey, they'll
Yeah.
probably buy it more, right? Like I have tried the product, I think it tastes great. But like because I know this whole journey they've been on through LinkedIn and their Instagram, like I'm just more willing to buy it and be like, oh, I've heard that brand. Like I know their story, I'm gonna buy that. So the more personal you get, and this might be getting into one of our other points in the future, but the more personal that you get, the better it's going to be. And it's so hard sometimes to put yourself out there, but it's so important to like people love knowing who is running the brand and their experience. Like you might think, oh,
Hmm.
they just talk about how this chocolate tastes and the fact that it has protein in it or whatever. But like really, people love to know how it was made, where it was made, by who, what was their journey. So, if you're, for example, not comfortable posting on your personal page, fine. But then on your business page on LinkedIn, try getting a little personal. I think that could be really interesting too, like you said.
Yeah, for sure. And just to quickly touch on like a lifestyle brand, you'd probably recommend that they be more so on like a visual platform like Instagram and TikTok over LinkedIn, for instance.
Yeah, for sure. So I think for a visual brand, for a consumer based brand, it always has to be Instagram. Like Instagram still kind of rules in that area.
Yeah.
TikTok is really cool as well, though, just because you could actually grow organically really fast, like you could in the
Hmm.
old days of Instagram. You just
Oh, the
need
good old
so,
days.
remember those?
No, I
So,
don't. They're long
so
gone.
it's like 10 years ago, I know, but it did happen. So like TikTok is in that golden age. So like use
Hmm.
that. But at the same time, I always don't want to stress people out by saying you have to be on TikTok, because you do need like so much content output. And
Yeah.
something else that I say a lot if you work with me is like, do something well versus doing everything. So if you can do Instagram really well and you just can't have like the output you need for TikTok, like one video a day or two videos a day, then it's better to not do it than to do it badly as well. So like, if it's just Instagram, that's fine. Instagram's good with like an every other day posting. Sorry, I know I'm getting into our future
No,
combo
that's
now
good.
too.
That's fine. I was going to jump to that next.
But yeah, for sure. And Pinterest as well. Like if you're selling a product, Pinterest is so great as a search engine because people are actually searching something that you're selling versus like maybe stumbling across it like on Instagram. So Pinterest is a nice little tool as well.
Yeah, for sure. And so to go to our next point, we're just going to jump to how often we should post because this is like super straightforward. But like you said, it's better to be posting consistently than to not be posting at all or to be like super sporadic or burn yourself out, right? And then like basically go on a hiatus for months on end. Is there like a golden rule that you have, or is it really just a matter of like consistency?
Consistency over everything, for sure. I can tell you the best practices because, those are ones that we know work with the algorithm. So every other day posting for Instagram and Facebook, every day or more posting for TikTok, 3 times a week during the week for LinkedIn, Pinterest, a little bit all over the place, just like making sure you're posting regularly and repinning. But more than all those like rules that we'll call them,
Hmm.
just post. Like and post consistently. If you post 5 times in one week and you don't post for 3 weeks, like it's not going to work for anybody. No one's going to see like 3 of those posts. The algorithm's going to forget about you. So it's better to post like twice a week or even once a week if that's all you can do versus just like getting this like big push of posts when you feel like it and then posting nothing. And that can really just be about scheduling too. Like
Yeah, I was going
make
to say.
10 posts. Yeah,
Hmm.
scheduling is everything. Like 10 posts, put, in your scheduling platform 2 a week and you just like know that's done
Yeah.
is so much more important than like focusing on how many you need to put out.
Yeah, for sure. And there are tons of scheduling options out there. We use later.com,
Mhm.
but I mean, there are tons of free options. So if anyone is curious and wondering, like, can I schedule on my own without having to like break the bank? Yes, you can. There are free options, there are paid options, even the paid options that are like, I don't know, like 10, 12, $15 maybe per platform, something along those lines. But yeah, definitely accessible. Okay, so that was number 4 on how often we should post. Let's move on. We started to talk about this. Number 5 on what content resonates with your audience. So that's a question. We want to make sure that like the content that we're putting out is resonating with our audience. So we spoke about midday squares and how they're communicating with us, how it's obviously resonating with us, and we're able to, connect with them and in turn want to buy their product and want to support them because we know their story. We feel like there's a connection. So what ideas do you have for listeners who might be feeling stuck or unsure of what to create and post in terms of something that will resonate with their audience?
Yeah, I think one thing I always go back to, and it could just be because of my journalism background, but it's just storytelling. Like it also, I feel like takes a lot of the cringe out of this. And I think that's something that I did want to mention today is that often people feel like when they're posting about themselves or their brand, there's like that cringe element, right?
Mm,
And I think that's really something to let go of in a lot of ways, but I know it's hard. And one way to let go of it is really just telling a story and remembering that like all marketing goes back to storytelling. And if you just think about like what story did you need to tell with your brand and start telling it, people can tell that's authentic and natural to you. So, if you have your content pillars, I think with, any brand, it could be talking about your brand, talking about what's behind your brand, and talking about more like lifestyle related content to your brand, right? So that's like a pillar that you can go within, but just think about also yourself. Like, what do you look for on social media? What do your friends look for on social media? What's real to you? What's the story behind what you would tell your client on a meeting when they ask you a question? Or like, what kind of advice would you give? And people just see that that's real.
hmm.
So, if you're a brand with like a certain community, then talk to that community. If you're doing I'll just go back to my previous example, like an eco product. Maybe there's a community that really cares about that. Like, what stories do they want to hear? Maybe it
Mhm.
actually has like nothing to do with your brand, but it's something you talked about to someone at a store yesterday when you were in line. You'd be surprised how much like that random stuff really resonates with the brand. If it resonated with you, it'll probably resonate with someone else. And then you could start to like pick up all of those types of pieces of content that your audience likes and create a pillar out of that. And then
Mhm.
start searching. Of course, looking for inspiration is great. So going on your competitors, going on accounts that maybe have nothing to do with your brand, but you really like them,
And the
and
way
just
they
getting
put
that
things together
inspiration.
too. Yeah, like how they put the things together, how they edit their videos, the type of content they're
Yeah.
posting, if it's like a carousel versus a reel, all of that. For sure. There's so many things to analyze and look at. And when you were speaking, I was just thinking about like the people who I love to follow the most are the ones who, and I think I want to kind of break down storytelling further because I think it's just used so commonly and no one really
Yeah.
knows like what that means. What does storytelling actually mean? Like we
So true.
understand like reading a book, following a story, but if
Yeah.
you think about it, storytelling is really bringing someone like along a journey and making them feel and experience the things that you have, or kind of like bringing them on with you on whatever the journey story might be. So the people that I connect with the most is when they're sharing about like their personal life or what happened that day, kind of like you were saying. And I love just kind of hearing their perspective and speaking as if they're speaking to me. So it's not super curated, which I think I personally even fall into that trap. And I think a lot of people do. They feel like they have to like overly prepare and say all
Mhm.
the right things in the perfect tone and in the perfect way. And this podcast has actually been like a perfect outlet for me to practice not to do that, because you're really
Yeah.
just kind of speaking top of mind, and it doesn't always come out perfectly. But at the end of the day, I think that's what people connect with more. And like by sharing those examples and those actual stories, it's like if you were to tell your friend a story of what happened that day, like it's as simple as that. If you break it down that way and think of it that way, you could communicate stories about your brand story there, and obviously through the content pillars that you would have broken down. But that's a whole other episode about the pillars.
Yeah, you're so right though. People often think of a story like beginning, middle, and end, like a book they watch, like, oh, I have to write like a whole book in a post
Mm-hmm.
somehow. But it's really when we mean storytelling, it's like one little snippet of that, right? So like I would say the posts that do the best for Clio at least are ones that are really honest and ones that are kind of like a hot take in some ways, right? It's not just regurgitating what everyone else is saying online. So one recently was about the fact that, follower count matters less than the quality of your post. So, it might seem obvious to some people in the business, but a lot of people are still so focused on that follower count a lot of the
Mm-hmm.
time. And so we did a post about that and it really resonated with people because it was just honest, right? And it was what we were thinking, but it was like a little snippet. Say we have a whole conversation. I just pulled out like three lines of what I said, but that's still storytelling, even if it's just like a little clip of the snippet. So I think that's important too when you're talking about how to tell a story. It's not always has to be like the entire story in
Yeah.
one go.
Yeah, and the whole idea of like repurposing content too is so key. And like again, could be a whole other episode of like how we can repurpose that content, because there are so many ways to break it down. And content creation can be so overwhelming for businesses these days because there's just like so much pressure to put everything out there on every single platform. And it's like you can do, let's say, a podcast episode, and in that podcast episode you pull some clips, you have some reels, you pull some sections and you have a blog post, you pull some other elements and you have like a quote, whatever. Anyways, it can go on.
Yeah.
We're gonna save it for another day.
Yeah, it's
Okay,
important.
to wrap up, point number 6, so of the questions that we want to be asking ourselves when building a social media strategy is your profile optimized? So this can mean a lot of different things depending on what platform we're talking about. I think since we've been talking the most about Instagram and LinkedIn, let's talk about those two. Instagram, obviously, you have your highlights. We want to make sure that everything there is nicely organized, that it makes sense. You want to utilize basically everything that you can, right? You have, what else? You tell me the rest.
It's actually for a business page so important. Like a personal page can be a little more authentic, a little more like messy and chaotic because like if that's
Right.
who you are, that makes sense. But a business page, you want people to experience like the level that they experience that they actually work with you or they actually buy from you. So
And
you
be
want it
like
to look
organized too. Yeah, exactly. Not just so
Exactly.
chaotic. I think that organization element of a business page, unless, it would be funny if it was like on brand. Let's say it was like, I don't know, like a cleaning brand and it was
Yeah.
just like chaotic and they're like, we're going to clean up this mess. I don't
Oh my
know.
gosh. Yes. Idea for a cleaning business if anyone's listening.
There you go.
That would be really funny. But it's true. Like on an Instagram page, you want to have, your highlights all have like nice covers, be really clear what they're about. Highlights are so important. It shows people exactly who your brand is through these like little clips that you've previously made. So they're hopefully already in existence in some way. And
Hmm.
I don't know, I personally look at them all the time. Like I click through highlights to read like menus or like what's
Yeah.
going on or what are you doing or
Yes.
like hours or
It's like a
whatever. Like
shortcut.
it's all
Yeah.
there.
It's
Yeah.
like a shortcut to like the most important information, the things that you want to communicate for sure to whoever's on your page.
Yeah.
Because
And in
everything
your
else, like they can
bio.
find, they can
Yeah.
find, but those things that you're like, hey, they can't miss this. And I guess that's also what those pins are for too. Like you could
Yeah.
pin the top 3 posts and that's super helpful, like in organizing it that way. Okay, what else? What else do we have to get our shit
I
together
love
with?
pins. Pins are great. Pin the most important stuff. And so I think people pin like what they like the best. Like, no, pin what people have to know. Like, what do they have to know about your brand?
Hmm.
Those are your 3 top pins. The bios, like these are so funny to me sometimes because our attention spans are so small. Like if there's, 15 brands that do the same thing you do, like in your city or something, you have those are like competitors to you and someone can go to one of those really easily. They even Instagram pops them out so nicely for the people that are looking
Yeah.
right below.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware of that. If your bio is too creative sometimes that it doesn't even say what you're doing, think about that, right? Like
Hmm.
I know it's a limited characters. I know we all want to be really amusing and creative, but it's so important in that bio on Instagram to say exactly what you do.
Hmm.
And that has to be the top priority. And same on LinkedIn, like that line where it says what you do has to be so specific. And then, your own LinkedIn profile, like, your work history, it matters for sure, but also think about that little bio, but like beneath your picture, the cover photo that you have, like, LinkedIn gives you a lot of little spaces to
The
use
banner
up
on
to,
top too. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like
Hmm.
use them, like use all those little pieces. Why not? Like they're giving them to you.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think we covered it all.
Here's one more thing I was thinking of with content actually that kind
Yeah.
of gets into a little bit of also like being an entrepreneur in the world. I think sometimes it's so hard when you're just standing there by yourself trying to create content. So I always encourage people to create a community, right? Having a community of entrepreneurs around you that you could just kind of like shoot off ideas is so nice. Like, we met years ago and sometimes we'll just call each other and be like, what do you think of this? Or like, are you experiencing this as well? And it
Hmm.
just helps so much that you're not siloed in your own thing. So
Yeah.
you could even say an idea to get 5 different entrepreneurs in a room or like in a virtual room together and bounce ideas off each other. Similar to what you did maybe at a previous agency or like in an old job you had where you would literally sit in a boardroom and bounce ideas off for a campaign. Like try that again because you'll find that like energy comes from each other. And then you'll leave and be like, oh, now I want to write all these posts and like I'm feeling inspired. And so like you can create your own environment to brainstorm, even if you feel like, oh, it's just me like solopreneur doing everything. It doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, it can be challenging, it could be isolating, but having that community is super supportive and having like either like a coach or a mentor or something like that, at least for
Hmm.
me, has also been helpful. I know that you've connected with a mentor as
Yeah.
well. Just someone who's maybe a little bit further along the path than you, regardless of like your industry or the business that you're running. Because entrepreneurship, like regardless, there are so many parallels, and we've all either gone through it or are going through it or will continue to be going through it together. So it's like if you're experiencing something, chances are someone else experienced something similar and can kind of share how they got over it, what they learned, and it just kind of expedites your process a little bit, or at least like enlightens you and makes you feel a little bit better that you're not the only one going through it. You're like,
Literally.
oh yeah, okay, business is hard for you too. Oh great.
Exactly. Totally.
Amazing. Okay. Well, Blair, before we wrap up, I always end the podcast with what I call the mindful minute. I know that this episode was a little bit different than anyone listening is typically used to because we didn't talk about your brand and business, but we can definitely have you back to speak more about like how that entrepreneurial journey has been for you. But I think it's been super helpful in just sharing your expertise in building a social media strategy and some of the questions that people should be asking themselves if this is something they want to tackle on their own. And of course, they can connect with either one of us if they have further questions. So before we get into, where they can find you, what is something that you want to leave with people today? Something that maybe they can't learn from a textbook or from school that you feel would be helpful for them?
Yeah, well, today we're talking about strategy, and obviously we encourage posting and consistency. But I think on the other flip side of it, something that I wish someone had told me when I started on this entrepreneurial journey is that it's okay if sometimes it falls apart. Like, it's okay if you don't post for a month. It's okay if, your blog doesn't get any new blog posts for a few weeks. Like, that is always something that really got me down for a long time. But if I look back on the years, it didn't actually affect anything in any really long-term way.
Yeah.
And that stress you give yourself when you don't post once in a while, it's okay. Like, everything, I've let someone say to me, like, if you just don't put out content for a short period of time, it's okay. Like, everything will be okay.
Yeah, that's fair to say because we all kind of have our ups and downs. And it is helpful when you have a team and there are other people to help like keep you accountable or to actually like do the job that maybe you would have been the one to drop off doing. So as you continue to grow, having that support is definitely helpful. But I think that's a great message for people that like it's okay. I mean, listen, guys, at the end of the day, we're just trying to run a business. We're just trying to like, I mean, your business might be changing the world, but I don't know, it's not rocket science,
Maybe it is. I don't know.
Maybe, honestly, maybe it is. But I think we can all figure it out. Okay,
Yeah.
amazing. So where can everybody find you to learn more about Clio Social and more about what you're doing just personally too as an entrepreneur?
So Clio you can find at cliosocial.com or at cliosocial on Instagram. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. Just look up my name, / Blair Melodic. And I've been posting a little bit more about my journey and about social media on there as well.
Amazing. Okay, well, that's it, guys. We'll chat next week. Bye.